Google's just been lying to people. I'm totally shocked.
Deep dive into the Google AI overview UX you have done on understanding how users interact with AI overview. So what surprised you most in the data?
Because trust is so big now, because there's a lot of mistrust, and AI presents information where people are like, I don't know if I trust things anymore. It's a very large amount where people are looking more than anything for trust, and they're not so much just looking for the best answer. I think SEO has become a lot more similar to branding. It's really tough because you have to sell your clients. It's not anymore just about people clicking through from the search results, which is so measurable and so much easier to sell your services.
Welcome to the Agency Insider Show. I am your host Navneet Kaushal, and today we have a very special guest, Eric van Buskirk. Eric is a renowned SEO data study professional, founder of Clickstream Solutions, and a leading authority on search, user experience, and digital marketing analytics. He's worked with industry giants like Ahrefs, SEMrush, SimilarWeb, BuzzSumo, and has led some of the largest independent studies on how people use Google, especially in the age of AI overviews. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, Navneet, thanks so much for having me on.
So, Eric, let's start with your journey and philosophy. You had a fascinating career from your early days, working on web communities to founding Clickstream Solutions, and of course, now leading massive data studies. Can you walk us through your journey and what drew you to the intersection of data, SEO, and user experience?
Sure. So, yeah, I feel very lucky. I worked for Delphi Forums when forums were the biggest form of community on the internet. That was 1999. And it was an almost big hit, but it didn't. We thought we would do IPO. We didn't. And then I went through the .com collapse. I went through that experience, got back into all things internet, and then when I was doing agency work at that time, which was maybe 15 years ago, I was doing SEO as well as design and development. And then I worked for SEMrush more recently, maybe 9 years ago. That was just an incredible experience because at that time, no one really had hands-on SEO experience, whereas I had been doing this for clients prior to working there. And so I was like, wow, we have all this internal data. We charge a lot of money for people to access the API, but internally we had our own API. It was just like, oh my goodness, you could do things that weren't even possible they weren't even accessible to people with big companies like enterprise SEO software companies who are paying us thousands. And I was like, it's crazy. Like no one's really using this. So I started writing for SEJ, and I was like, this has to be done. Like, I've got to start learning how to do this. And I hadn't really had data analysis experience, although academically I had the experience quite a bit. And that's really where I started a lot of this. After that, I left SEMrush. I was at the time the largest rank study with Backlinks, working with Brian Dean. It's still one of the more comprehensive ones because the cool thing from being at SEMrush is when you work for a company like Ahrefs, SEMrush, and when you work with like clients and stuff like that, you have a chance to meet all sorts of people in the industry. So I had these relationships, and I was able to partner when I was doing this with Brian with other people over at like SimilarWeb, with Ahrefs, all of that. This is getting too long-winded, but so long story short, then I also did some of these data studies for Neil Patel. Last year, I did a big one, more just directly partnering with a data provider, which was Surfer, has a lot of great data, and I've known Mikhail for quite a while. And then I met Kevin Indig when I was doing something with Surfer, a webinar. And I basically pitched him afterwards on the idea of doing the largest usability study of Google search, where, with like desktop recordings. And we later got more ambitious. We're like, well, wait, all right, let's actually do like microphone as well. Because really no one had done that. There'd been a big one of desktop recordings, but no one had done anything like this. And I have to say, what's so amazing to me still is like these kinds of studies are very unusual. Like there's only a handful of times when people have done like a remote usability study of a third-party website. No one's done it, for example, on, let's say, Instagram. No one. And it just seems like such a fascinating way of analyzing what people are doing. And the last thing I'd say is that it's ironic that I named my company Clickstream, and yet this kind of usability study is exactly going beyond Clickstream. It's saying, sure, we have all the Clickstream, which is like click data with Ahrefs, going through Ahrefs, going through SEMrush, but we don't know all these specific things people are actually doing, these behaviors. And especially if they even speak into a microphone, if they're doing that. And it just brings you a whole new wealth of information. So that's why, yeah, this project, doing it with Kevin, has just been so much fun. That's the long version.
Okay. Now, you said before this that the big data should, I mean, in other talks of yours, you mentioned that big data should always tie back to user behavior. So can you unpack that philosophy a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that doing this study, and Kevin's the same way, both of us, like, we're blown away by how much as SEOs, and I'm sure everyone's like this, that we rely so heavily on the metrics that are coming from clickstream data or clicks data, which is, I won't go into it's very esoteric as to where it comes from, but we just both realized, like, oh my God, the story is not so simple. It's really not. Because you learn all these micro behaviors that people are doing when they're actually looking at these pages. And I mean, this Clickstream data has taken us so far. And of course, like, I worked at SEMrush. I love Ahrefs actually a lot more than SEMrush. And we rely so heavily on that. But what both Kevin and I realized, I think, is that we rely way too heavily. There's this whole number of behaviors, whole number of ways people, interact with the search results specifically, that you just start getting the wrong mental image of that because you're thinking too much of clicks. And there's the whole set of things that are very common. One of which is because trust is so big now, because there's a lot of mistrust, and AI presents information where people are like, I don't know if I trust things anymore. It's a very large amount where people are looking more than anything for trust, and they're not so much just looking for the best answer. So what used to be, like I said, okay, all this data research, like, oh yeah, it's all about, who's answering the question best in the search results. No, that's not it anymore. It's they have these complex ideas, and, of course, to each person, it's very specific, but if they recognize the name of something, and it could be in a very specific area, like, if they love skiing and they know the name of a certain mountain or a certain ski. Yeah, or it could be a big brand, but it's just a bit shocking how much they want to go to websites they've heard of, brands they've heard of, people they've heard of. And yeah, that's what I'm seeing as far as people all of us who rely on data. We have to think of that more if we're trying to rank websites.
Okay, so when we are on big data, let's explore a little bit more. You have overseen some of the just SEO and content marketing data studies, including the 1 million Google search results study for Brian Dean at Backlinks. What have been the most surprising or game-changing findings from these studies?
Sure. Some of those were a little further back, although it's great to see that they get done over every couple of years or something, and I do trust them, and it's challenging to try and think about, like, correlation doesn't always equal causation, as everyone says, but there's certain things that just keep confirming, and we see it in different ways. But of course, backlinks are just, over and over and over, so much confirmation how important they are. It's less so now. And I do believe that you can find a difference of the correlation. You come back and you say, okay, 2 years ago it was this, and now it's this. And you really get a sense of to what extent maybe it's less important. But actually, I think one of the most interesting things for me is the semantic relationships. And so using data from, like, Surfer, it's really incredible how you can see that on a big picture with big data, how just Google's just a giant like AI robot. And even before we had the current iteration of what we call AI, we always, not always, but for like last 8 years, they were using, so much of this natural language processing, which is very similar to AI. It's finding the appearance of words together. And when you analyze big data on that, you're basically backwards engineering not just related topics, but the degree of relationship.
Right.
And that stuff is fascinating. The analysis of words, basically, words on a page is really.
Now, in one of your Search Engine Journal article, you analyzed almost 2,500,000 search results to understand how Google evaluates content. What are the key takeaways for agencies and content creators today?
Sure. Again, I would say, this whole semantic similarity is super important. What I just said would be kind of the answer to that. I mean, that was the number one, in many ways, it was the number one on-page ranking factor, was how many of these related topics are you addressing versus not? So you can be an expert, but if you're missing that a lot of other websites, authority websites, trusted websites that Google's ranking high are also mentioning something related to what your article is, you're going to have a problem ranking. I think with myself and others, we tend to be so focused now on how AIOs are disrupting everything that maybe we are not paying as much attention to that kind of thing. So now, of course, it depends. It depends so heavily on what sector you're in, what kind of website you have, but some people are just so massively disrupted by AIO. Others, it's helped them. Google stopped ranking most publishing and affiliate sites. Probably some of your audience is doing affiliate. So, they're very focused on that. And I think they did it just at the time they were starting AIO. So it's like, which came first, the AI content or Google just killing off all the small, medium-sized websites? But these things have I feel like I and others are just maybe not even paying attention as much to the traditional metrics as we are to these massive shifts.
Okay. Now, let's deep dive into the Google AI overview UX study you have done, and which is on understanding how users interact with AI overview. So what surprised you most in the data?
I think what I mentioned about this business of looking for trust and authority, it does make sense, right? And also, this was USA. So I do wonder how different it is in Europe or in India. So obviously, we have this problem in the US where it's like a cultural civil war. And it creates a lot of, people don't trust each other, right? So it's like, oh boy, this article's from the other side. I don't want to read it. This article's from my side. I want to read it. So I would be so curious, like if this is also people act this way. I think it's very similar, certainly Europe. India, maybe I can't speak to as much. But that was really interesting to me. Oh, the other thing that was so interesting to me was, it's almost like people know they should be skeptical of AI, and they know that AI overviews are just AI. So, but at the same time, they try and confirm that it's accurate, but they do it. It's almost like, I don't know the right way to explain it, but they want to convince themselves that like, oh yeah, this is accurate, but they do it sometimes very quickly. So it'd be like, oh, people do read snippets a lot, which we don't know because we don't normally watch people's user behavior, but they actually read the organic snippets of other things. And if they see it for something they trust, and it even just a snippet seems to confirm what's in the AIO, they're like, oh yeah, that's accurate. And they'll say, I found the answer, because they had to tell us like, where would you choose to which answer do you think is best to answer a certain question? So they do a lot of that kind of confirmation, but they ultimately, this is surprising, they trust AIO a lot, which by extension means they trust AI. You can look at Kevin's write-up on Growth Memo, but off the top of my head, I don't remember, but it's a very, because they answer questions about trust after performing each one, and in a survey at the end. And so when people are doing this hands-on work, it's a lot more accurate than just a regular survey. So if you get given a survey by email, you're not in the middle of something. But if you're performing a bunch of searches and you're really thinking about like expertise, authority, trust, or your money, your life type questions, and it's my health, and it's my money, your mind is there and you're going to answer things more accurately. So I just feel like our survey questions in that context are very accurate, and they really pointed to people trusting AI, which is so important, because should they? Perhaps not as much as they do. And then what's going to happen in another year when Google just makes the whole search page like a question answer box that looks like ChatGPT? You know what I mean? Where
Right.
it's like ask another question, please, and don't go away. You know, which is they're already testing this. You know, maybe you're in that pilot test of where it's like, yeah, they give you one answer, but then do a follow-up.
Follow-up, right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's just the same as ChatGPT. It's no different.
Now, your deep dive methodology study on Google AI overviews and UX found some fascinating patterns. So, can you share a few actionable insights for agencies looking to optimize for both AI overviews and traditional search?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think what people care about now so much, where and also I think where the business is how in the world do you deal with this new monster, which is these overviews? Because they're and again, it affects some sectors, some websites more than others, but for some, it's just eating up their clicks. But what I think, I mean, Kevin's the one that identified. I didn't even have time to think about the results because I was so focused on the actual hands-on study at some points. But so he was thinking more deeply, and he made me realize like this whole concept of how such a lot of this is not just like clicks when it's AI, right? Because they're reading these things, and that's what we were trying to understand. What are they doing when they read this? I think SEO has become a lot more similar to branding, and you need to. It's really tough because you have to sell your clients on. It's not anymore just about people clicking through from the search results, which is so measurable and so much easier to sell your services.
Right.
But you know, you need to keep coming up with you need to keep appearing in the AI. And yeah, it'll also have an impact on clicks for that specific search. But you know, people are going to learn about you, and it's not just clicks; it's part of their journey, and they're going to compare you. And if you're not showing up in the AIO, then your competitors are going to win that race. So then, of course, the question is, well, how do you show up in AIO? And that's kind of a question for another day. But you know, you have to understand what is Google, what is ChatGPT, what is Perplexity, what are these systems doing to hoover up and vacuum up all this information where they mention your name or your brand or help you out. Yeah.
Okay. Now, so how did you decide which SERP feature to track and which ones were most ignored by users?
Interesting question, huh? Yeah, really interesting. So this thing was such a unicorn because I couldn't just go back and I mean, there's been some things like this done, but the last big one was Backlinko. But things were so different. Like, you know, I think it was 6 years ago. It may have been a little less, but everything's totally radically changed. So I really had to kick the tires a lot. We tested quite a number of people before we even launched this. I mean, this was a very expensive. And so we had to test it because I really wanted to see certain things happening with people's results and the way they not challenged, but the way they thought through what they saw, right? And at first, like I thought, oh, you know, let's make these questions where there's like deceptive information in the AIO. And then I realized like, no, that's going to be really too difficult. The first questions that I was doing were like, how, you know, how tall was Napoleon, and was he tall or short? Because AIO gets that wrong. because most sources don't understand that Napoleon, French leader, was not short. Actually, it's just wrong, but it's too subtle. So in the end, the most important thing I was trying to find was different features of search that would play off of each other, sometimes in a simple way. Some of them were pretty unusual, like because there's just not many like them. There was a question that was like, how do you transfer money from PayPal to your bank account, which had an AIO. And it was quite unusual for something to be transactional, very brand oriented, big brand, and I don't even know why they would decide to do that, because they didn't do that in a lot of other cases. And then of course the first answer organically was PayPal. So I love that one, right? Because it's like, what are they going to click on? Which are they going to choose? And I also knew, of course, PayPal doesn't always have the greatest reputation. That didn't come up so much, but yeah, it was just interesting to see how they choose between them. And then you mentioned how much, what did not appear as much, or what did not get looked at. Well, this is where also fascinating to me is to think that, of course, Google's doing just what we did, right? So they have all of this, and they have it 10 times, 100 times more and more accurate. And it's their website, so they can track these things more easily. So they know what people are interacting with. I think with usability with this, so it's a little harder with video. I was a little bit surprised people didn't go to videos more. I don't know. It gets pretty complex. Like a lot of times we didn't tell them that, and we didn't say you could or couldn't, but we didn't say like, oh, by the way, like you should go read this blog post if you're going to choose it as your main result, because there's not enough time, right? But that does create a challenge, because it's like we have limited time, they have limited time, they know they have to finish this, they're asked to choose a result, and yet, what if so a lot of times some of these people did want to skim through the article to really say like, yeah, this is the answer I like. Whereas video, it's like, no, you can't skim through a video. So it may have been a little underrepresented in this study. We have also had, well, actually it was Tim Sulo that mentioned like, wait a minute, are you sure this is going to be accurate? Because they don't have a skin in the game. I actually, to be honest, I felt it was very accurate. And, this is where you have to also trust the real usability pros that do this like for years and years. But, people do searches for their friends, for their family. And, one of these like how to waterproof boots at home or blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, maybe they don't really care about doing that for themselves, but we do a lot of searches on a daily basis that are interesting, as long as they're interesting, or that we feel we need to know that, or a question that's related to health that actually some of them they wouldn't have thought of. Another one was, are artificial dyes unhealthy? And it's actually a very controversial subject, because there's just disagreements about it. So would they have searched for that on their own time? They might not have thought of it. But I think what we saw sometimes is people would just be like, oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah. So that gives you an idea of the different kinds of features of search that and I'm going a little bit of tangents, but the different features of search to choose.
Now, what actionable takeaways should SEO draw from your AIO research?
I think most of all is what I was mentioning about how we've become way too complacent and too simplistic in the way we use these metrics to track things. They're really important, and to be honest, like I'm probably much more guilty than the last person until I did this study. Because here's a great example. Like I'm one of the many people that probably didn't pay enough attention to what is the snippet that's going to appear in your organic result. We don't see people looking at these things, so we think, why, that's not so important. And of course, Google rewrites our meta tags, meta descriptions sometimes, but it's very important. It's become, looking through the search results has become a matter more of reading than just clicking. And people need to understand that. And that's one of the most important takeaways. Again, for agency owners, it's tough because, these findings are showing these behaviors that are not as easy to they're not as easy to measure, right? And so it's tough to go to your client and be like, oh, by the way, I want to do a big survey of all of our users. Oh God, that's a tough sell. But the more that their clients understand that SEO has become more similar to branding and more about name recognition, including in search, the more the clients are going to understand. You better understand, the branding and the way people are thinking about what your website is, not just measuring click behavior, because it's not enough. It's not going to tell you enough. I think that's a really huge takeaway for sure.
Right. Let's talk about user behavior, attention, and UX patterns. You implemented both dwell time tracking and eye cursor metrics. Why are both essential, and how did they inform SERP design insights?
Yeah, so the whole dwell time thing does get pretty specific. Sometimes it felt like, oh, is it really so important? But it's very precise. It's something that in usability studies are considered important because people like to see very measurable results. I just talked about how click measurements are too relied on. Well, here's an area of usability that's very measurable, because you're literally looking at timers to figure out how long someone spends in a certain area or scrolls. And there are all different ways you can very precisely measure this. So that's one reason it's important, because it can back up if someone were to say like, oh, well, you have these ideas by watching videos, but maybe it's just biased. Well, it's not biased, because go watch the videos and time it yourself and you'll see these things happening. But so these dwell times, these scrolling behaviors, they definitely can be sort of combined with survey, combined with other kinds of behaviors. Obviously, it's important too, because so what we found, this is another big finding, was that when people really had a stake in something, they would look a lot more carefully. And maybe that's obvious, I'm not sure, but you got to keep that in mind. As SEOs, we talk a lot about this, your money, your life subjects. Well, yeah, you need that to rank, but then once you rank, or if you're talking about the AIOs, the people are looking very carefully at the search result pages for that, because they feel it's important to their health or their finances. So that's one reason why I think it was important. Also, with the scrolling, it was interesting to see a typical behavior or a similar behavior where they don't scroll very far in the AIO. So they're looking primarily at the top half, which is, it's similar to, the search result page, where again, they don't really want to choose something at the bottom. And all of this is a very quick behaviors, right? Looking quickly. Yeah.
Right now, has our attention behavior changed due to visual features like featured snippet, local packs, and now AIO?
A good question. I mean, of course, the $1 million thing is this giant AIO blocks. They're eating up people's attention, but they're so text heavy. For me, I kind of like that as an SEO, because we work primarily with text. If somebody's like a YouTube guy or gal, then, they think more in terms of those things. Although I'm actually a visual person, I'm really interested in visual stuff, but it's harder for me to think about as an SEO. How do you actually analyze that? So the other thing with that is you asked to become more visual. With AIO, it's visual in the sense of the same way that people look, I would say, at something like blog posts or how they read things on the web. So I found it really interesting how their behavior in reading an AIO block, it's almost to me a little like a mini blog post. So if you look at how they read these, like a 400-word block of text with bold words, with these silly looking link icons that Google puts there, which just like, who does? That's not a very common thing to have a link icon. They treat these things similarly, I think, as you would find on how someone's treating when they are looking at like a blog post. It's a very similar kind of reading pattern. And the same kind of jumping from sort of headlines. They're not going to read the whole thing from starting at the top. No, they're going to look for the like jump to headlines and jump around. And if they don't like the image of like a anchor link, which is it's just they don't like those because it's not a good way to find information. By the way, yeah, so they love to click on text that's hyperlinked. It feels very natural, I think, to people. But I was really shocked they don't click on these artificial like buttons, like link buttons. Yeah.
Okay, now, so what's your take on scroll depth versus click through as a trust signal?
Interesting. Scroll depth and I'm sorry, scroll depth and what?
Click through.
Oh, click through. So I think with the clicks, again, I would say we need to be more careful. What do they mean? Because a lot of times it doesn't mean much. You know, and of course, we saw a lot of this pogo sticking where they click for a quick answer or they quickly say, I don't like it, right? And they come back. And of course, we've learned, I mean, I hate to put this so black and white, but I mean, Google's just been lying to people. I'm totally shocked. When I was at SEMrush, my buddy was the head of marketing, and he used to say to me, like, oh, you know, they're sniffing out people's pogo sticking from Chrome behavior, things like that. I was like, dude, are you kidding me? Like, that would be the biggest scandal in the history of big tech if they were, because they've said many, many times in many contexts they don't do it. Well, now we find out they are doing it, and they have been. Yeah. But we have to be careful with these clicks because they're not always what they think we are. They're not always a trust. They could be something else. We don't know exactly what they are. We have to think more deeply about how people are giving consideration when they see something. You said clicks and you said scrolls. So scrolls,
Yes.
by the way, yeah, we also measured, it sounds like you really read the study, so thank you for that. But we also measured the scrolls within certain sections, like organic. And
Right.
that was interesting too. I mean, there was, I think, longer scroll time within AIO, but it was interesting to see how much they scroll around and read through the different potential answers and what kind of information they're looking for, which again is so often, who do they think is reliable? By the way, maybe that's another good word, is reliable, because we're so tired of using trust and authority. But scrolling through the different SERPs and trying to figure that out too. Yeah.
Right. Now you work with data from SEMrush, BuzzSumo, and Ahrefs. How do you evaluate data set credibility before using it?
Well, so I used to be more into all of the Clickstream data, and it's quite interesting, the evolution. Do you think that's something that people don't? I mean, I think it's pretty advanced, or not? Do you think it is? Like the way in which these software tools get those measurements? Sometimes I feel like, oh, I shouldn't go in that because it's too, no one cares. It's not important. I mean, actually, the more useful answer for your user or for your followers is agency people who have to be advanced is, should they trust these metrics in the tools? Because by the way, that's what I use when I do these studies. It's the same information. It's just I can come at it sometimes from a more complex way because I have a Python guy that's analyzing tons of stuff inside there. But do you think people really consider that, the reliability of that?
I mean, a lot of time it becomes confusing because so much data is available and so much variance in different data, that becomes the problem. So you would have two different data sets giving you a different result for a same type of search or for a same type of option. That becomes a challenge.
Right.
Reliability of data comes into question.
Yeah, for sure. So this, I mean, the way that they're getting it now for like SEMrush or Ahrefs is they're doing it more through piecing together from different sources. And then I think, at least the last time I checked, I understand it. They don't really want to make it very public what all these sources are. So I think it's really hard for us to say externally how reliable that is. Of course, somebody could easily study, and actually there are studies out there. I'm not sure I've read them, but the differences between, I think that'd be really interesting to see. If you're someone that's overseeing a whole team and you want to know how in an agency, how reliable is this stuff? You should read that. Like, what is the difference between SEMrush and Ahrefs? And you should know the variability, right? Like Moz was really focused on the difference of the time of year. Whereas, I think Ahrefs and SEMrush, they're giving this for year round, which tells a different picture. So you really should be aware of some of these things. The biggest one, of course, is traffic. Position is not, position's not based on Clickstream. That's based on them scraping their search results, which Google doesn't like. but they do it, and good for them, because Google does a lot of really, they take all kinds of data from people. Yeah,
absolutely. Now, what's your toolkit like today? What are your top 3 non-negotiable tools for data-driven SEO?
I've been doing this study so fully that I haven't been doing as much of the regular client work. We do a lot of link building also. So with link building, I mean, I've used Pitchbox for a long time. I'm friendly with those guys because I moved from Philadelphia. I live in Asia now, in Southeast Asia. It is, everyone knows, it's the Rolls Royce of link building. It's not cheap. So if you're going to use that,
yes,
you need to have a good strategy. Otherwise maybe you can find something else. I prefer Ahrefs to SEMrush. There's a lot of other tools today. I mean, for me, I think a lot of us get into this where we become so comfortable with a certain software. We've been using it for, many, many years. We just don't want to switch because there's friction to try something new. So I would say if people are newer to SEO, like, if that's a great side of it, is that they have that openness to be able to check out some newer tools. There's some, I think there's probably some really, really cool stuff coming out that I haven't had a chance to really dive deeply into, because for that reason alone. And I think that's great. If you're newer starting out, you should look at these newer tools. I'm trying to think what else I use in particular these days. Outreach. I just get a lot of custom data too. Like, I think it's invaluable to have somebody that has a knowledge of Python. We do so many things with, like, not just we, meaning like including your audience, does stuff with CSVs, and it just can be so easy if you have even a junior Python guy to do some of the data wrangling. It's very helpful for any number of different things. Even scraping, scraping can be a really useful thing. So you say, what's in my toolkit for that? Well, hiring a Python guy. Yeah.
Now, many SEO skips data visualization. How important it's in your work?
I love doing that. I just love doing it. I think it can be so interesting to look at it. So for me, it's mostly just something I've enjoyed doing with these studies for a long time. It's not, there's people that that's what they do all day long, and they do it on very complex things. But I've kind of made a specialty of just doing it, especially for ranking, because then I use this thing called Tableau, which a lot of people would say is not best for like rank studies or rank data, or they might say for SEO it's not the greatest, but it's free, and there's ways you can not really worried that it's free, because it's free as long as you make it public and you're sharing it. Which, if you're doing like data studies where you want to share and it helps increase your visibility, that's wonderful, because you're also sharing it on their platform. It's a little bit challenging sometimes to share those, because some screens don't show it that easily. Their interactive visualizations can be a bit complex. But the one that I did with Surfer, I spent a lot of time on that, and it was pretty cool what you could do. So that's, again, it's called Tableau. You could anyone that wants to could search the web. They're probably the biggest data visualization company in the world. And then their free version is Tableau Public. Okay. I think a person could get started fairly easily. Yeah.
Okay,
But there's
now,
simpler software to do for that. Yeah.
okay, let's talk a little bit on controversies. So now, in your recent post, you talked about UX being a more reliable ranking factor than links in some cases. Now, that's a bold statement. So can you expand on that?
Actually, I don't think I said that. Kevin may have said that in something he published. But wait, what did you say
Okay,
again?
so
That they were more reliable what than links?
the UX signals are more reliable
Hmm.
ranking factor than links.
Oh, yeah, that is. I see what you mean. It's a kind of an abstract idea. I mean, the question I guess would be reliable to who? To Google, or if someone, of course, that's been an argument for a long time with SEOs. Is Google going to just use user behavior as a better signal for ranking things than links? I think that's the question that's most useful. And what do I think there? I mean, they've just increasingly gone less and less with links, but they still rely heavily on them. I think with all the guest posting world out here, paid guest post, I mean, it's changed so much even in 6 to 8 years, where before it was less. Now it's just open that everyone is paying for guest posts. And then this question becomes, well, to what extent can Google surface something that is or is not? And to me, it's all about what are they thinking over there in California and in Mountain Edge. And if you're getting links from sites that just couldn't credibly be thought of to do guest posting, it wouldn't make sense. I've got to believe that continues to be a huge rank factor. You know, I do most of my actual SEO work has been for e-commerce companies, and when you can get a link from another e-commerce company, like that's a huge signal. Because why would they just be like doing paid links on their website? It's just a clear signal. And then as far as tracking user behavior that Google can do in the future,
Right.
a lot of it's just about compute. It's the same. I should know more about the ways in which they're doing their own like AI systems or models that are independent of Google search, but they're buying up all of this compute, and they have to have it cheaper, and they have to have more and more and more. So the more they can have that compute, the more they can also look at signals on how people are interacting or what they're doing on specific websites. So there is that side of it that I think does make the way in which people interact on websites continues to become a little more important than links, even though I still think links are just super important.
Let's talk about future of SEO, AI, and content now. With AI overviews taking screen real estate, how should agencies rethink content placement?
I mean, I would say again, this whole business of you got to sell to your clients that it's about getting attention and not just about getting visits to your website. So everything you're doing, and some of that is just even social media, So there's always been obviously this big sort of interplay between social media and SEO, and also the teams that are managing social media and SEO. And so in some ways it's gone back and forth. And there were times when it became really big, like, I don't know, 10 years ago when Google had their own social media and stuff. And then people backed off of it as a signal. But I do think it's become really important now. So you've got to focus on that kind of like, visibility and brand stuff. And you've got to probably partner more often with these teams if your agency is working with like a bigger website or company, these bigger teams that are doing something that's going to help to create that awareness.
Okay, and what advice would you give to SEO agencies that want to future-proof their SEO, their services?
Well, I'm like most people, got really scared when I saw all this coming. I mean, gosh, the number of people I knew that just like, I'm preparing for the end of the world. I know I'm going to have to jump off the ship in, whatever, 6, 12 months. It's just amazing. And even I realized like I should be doing more research and less client work. And I'm thankful that I've had that chance, because I did come from this research background and had done so much of that. I just think people should kind of diversify more and not rely just on SEO and what they're doing. And I think the example I just gave too, where they should be either partnering with like social media agencies or these other teams. Also, of course, PR. I haven't mentioned all the world of like PR link building, which is so effective and so useful. But that's another way in which they've got to branch out. I think a lot of what traditional SEOs have done is just not as meaningful, because AI is taking over that the visits to someone's website that would have otherwise come from Google. So yeah, you've got to look in a new place. And then of course there's the world of AI, which is so interesting to me too. Like how do people monetize working for clients on their AIO? And it's mostly very different, but in terms of like how companies can appear in AI, that's perhaps more similar to SEO. But yeah, there's actually working with how can their clients use these systems to build their brand other than just the visibility of what's happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are there any overlooked metrics or signals that agency should pay more attention to when analyzing search performance and user engagement?
I think again, it's easy to oversimplify. Another, when you're looking for, like, for example, like how should I go after a certain topic to rank it, or a set of phrases. And it's easy to try and look at the more simple stuff, but that day is just so gone. Again, you do have to be thinking about like meta tags, and again, you have to, of course, really be thinking about the elements of the SERP and what's going to appear for certain keywords. And it does make the picture more complex when you're trying to like do research for what to write about, let's say. But you just can't overlook that, right? You have to be looking for what's going to appear. Are videos appearing? Are there features that are highlighting discussions in a particular SERP? And if there is, like, wow, you better think about that. Maybe instead of winning the keyword for your website, you should be thinking about, for this particular search, maybe I should be pushing my community guide to do more in the discussion groups, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay. And with the rise of AI generated content, what quality signals do you believe will become even more important for rankings and user trust? I know you mentioned brand as a trust factor, but are there any other signals as well?
A lot of where you have to just think about where they're sucking up all of this content from for the AI companies, whether it's Google or ChatGPT, and make sure that you're there if you can be. So that's a very different world, right, than what we're used to with SEO. It does overlap. People have always wondered, how on earth is Google looking at signals of something to help you rank that's not a backlink, let's say. And we know, most of all, if you go back a long way, we know they can do it. And in part, we know because with local search, we know, of course, how much those local citations matter, and that they are looking in certain places to validate if you're based in one city, let's say. Well, AI is kind of similar, right? You have to think about where you can be surfaced, where you should be appearing. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And so let's talk about the lessons from Clickstream, what you have learned. So what is the hardest lesson you learned while growing Clickstream?
Well, one thing, I guess, is that, I chose to start, this is kind of my second business. Half the reason was because I wanted to work remotely again, and perhaps out of the country. And it does present a lot of, I still am so happy I made that choice, but you got to think through what you're doing. And I chose to work from Southeast Asia, which is, it's 12 time zones away from where most people that I work with are. And California is even more difficult for me because I go to sleep late and get up late. So you have to consider those things. There's trade-offs, and I learned about those. and there's just the ability to work in person to me is so important. We've had these discussions since COVID about working in person, where it's quite interesting how the people in management or people that own a company or an agency, they're like, yeah, we want in person. In person is better. And then if you're an employee, of course, the answer is no. I want to be able to work from home. But as someone that's when I manage people, I just feel, yeah, I lose a lot. I have people that work for me, you know, whether it's off and on or part time, that I will never meet. You know, I have someone now doing a great job for me, working, who's, you know, went to university in South Africa, and yeah, it's tough to work with people remotely, and that's taken me a while to learn. And the cultural side of that too, if you're someone that chooses, you don't just have to be a remote company to learn that, but you know, if you're an American agency working with people in India, or people in India working with elsewhere, boy, it's a lot. I feel like that learning curve is huge. And it's a big investment in time to work with people from a totally different culture, but it pays off. But you just have to, I think you have to focus more on the long term. If you're gonna, you know, I've learned this with Clickstream, if you're gonna run your business with people in other countries or from other cultures, you've got to have a longer perspective, because it is going to require more time and perhaps money to figure out how to do a process for them.
Okay. So how do you attract and retain top tier SEO talents who actually understands data?
That's a great question. I go to people like you and ask them for referrals. Yeah. Yeah, that's been another bit of a challenge. It depends. I'm trying to think. Like, I did a project that I haven't really talked much about that was super cool, which was, when was it? It was less than a year ago, where I did some consulting for an agency owner that did a big data study on Google Shopping. And it was interesting because he did it as an agency, so he didn't really have the sort of the reach to make this, you know, to publicize this as much, but he had enough, and he was friends with Cyrus Shepard, and Cyrus really helped promote it. But when I did the study with him, which, I mean, I think it's probably and it's mostly him, you know, I just did some advising and some work on it, but it's to his credit that it was the best ever done. You know, someone can search for it, but he already had a Python guy who was fantastic, you know, so I came in and worked with him like that.
Okay.
But I've also had experience with another agency where I went in and they just didn't know anything about, I don't know, research with like a deeper dive of data. Like, of course, any SEO agency has to use Excel sheets, but they didn't know anything beyond that. And that was really tough, because they wanted their team to be involved in this project. And they had hired someone that I think actually was a really good, like, again, Python is typically the most important thing here. But that was really tough, because they wanted their team to be involved, and they just didn't really have that background. I have another thing coming up soon. Well, actually with Kevin, I mean, we're talking about a couple things, but it's really, oh, did I lose you? No, can you hear me? Oh, it says I can be heard. So am I still here now? And I know you can edit this out at the end.
Yeah. Hello. Can you?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, you were talking. You were getting something coming up with Kevin.
Oh yeah. So, I'm pretty excited. I mean, I'm not like stealing the fire from what might happen here, because it's just more personal. But I do have a good friend who's like a freaking brilliant developer and SEO, and he's just so busy that, to be honest, like, what's interesting is these research projects, the Python person, the developer, is not usually, their work is not super difficult. The more important work is, like, you know, setting up the methodology and then hand-holding them through it. So, but in this case, I'm thinking about some stuff that can be done, which also includes AI, where it would require some really fancy footwork. And so I'm super excited, because I get to work with someone I'm really good friends with, who I know is brilliant. And I have the most respect for the developers that work in SEO. They're super duper duper smart, because it's like, wow, I could never be like them. Right. And so working with someone like that, and of course I've done it before, because also, like, yeah, they do know how to help with a methodology. They do know how to implement these things and create a framework that's really going to work. Will be really exciting. And then I would just say, like, I find people on Upwork. I mean, I'm not the youngest guy in the game, obviously, but I've hired people on Upwork for forever, and I've done so much hiring in my time that it's not easy. There's some hiccups, but if you're careful, if you're used to it, it can work pretty well, I think. I tend to rely on reviews a lot. So, not just hiring people for this research, but for everything. Maybe I rely on them too much. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think there's too much gaming the system in something like Upwork?
I think recently it has been, but it's not that it's all bad. I mean, you would find good people as well.
Yeah. What do you think is a reliable place to find people to do like consulting or freelance?
Because most of the time I find people on LinkedIn posting too much, not done, all those fake things. But I think over a period of time, I have come that referral works the best. So if somebody can refer you, those things works best, I think.
Absolutely, yes. I totally agree. Yeah. And so, and in some ways it's the easy way out to just go, oh, okay, I'll just go to Upwork and blah, blah, blah. But you're right. It makes a lot more sense to take the time and talk to your network and find people that way.
Yeah. Now, one last question. So what role does storytelling plays in data-driven client reporting?
So I actually don't do as much with, when you say client reporting, I mean, obviously, you mean people that are helping to rank websites. I don't really do anything much different with that than other SEOs would do. Like for me, I've kind of become this very weird specialization of doing these big studies for agencies and for thought leaders. Actually, I plan on really focusing now on doing these more for agencies, like the one I mentioned where he had the idea himself and then came to me through Cyrus, actually referred me, but of agencies doing these projects that will help with their credibility and their authority, and people can see they're smart. But yeah, so my reporting for my clients is just really no different. It's more about these bigger projects and this bigger research and how do we do that, because of course the budget's bigger too. Like we're not just making graphs for this month's reporting on rank that only a couple of people are going to see. It's like we want to show something. I mean, look at what Kevin did on this project. What we published on Growth Memo. I mean, he really hired a beautiful designer to do those graphs. So it's a very different world, I guess. Yeah, for the reporting. Yeah.
Okay. Eric, thank you for giving us such an in-depth look into the data-driven SEO and, of course, the science behind the user behavior and data-first mindset. I think that modern agencies must adopt. Before we go, where can our audience find your work or get in touch with Clickstream for collaborations?
Sure. So is there somewhere I can leave any words, or can you put it in the show notes or something like that?
I will put it in the YouTube description below.
Sure. So my last name is a bit long. I am on LinkedIn a fair amount now, but it's Van Buskirk. Not that many SEOs with Van Buskirk, but who's going to remember that name? Clickstream is clickstream.cc. So maybe that's a good one, and I'll leave you that just so people can see that weird .cc, which I have as my TLD.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you once again, Eric, for giving me your valuable time.
Well, thank you, Nandid, for your time, and look forward to seeing you in person.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the Agency Insider Show. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and check out our next episodes for more agency insights that moves the needle. This is Navneet Kaushal signing off.